Heretic! How dare you talk to me about something other than D&D? Relax, my friends. Calm. Breathe. I'm going to talk to you about two other tabletop role-playing games. Unknown Armies 2nd Edition and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition. The talk of them is brief, and in essence, I've already done it. I've mentioned them. I'll provide a link in the description of where you might find them, and, well, that's about it. You've heard me mention my 40-year journey into the worlds of fantasy and D&D. D&D was the game that brought me into the hobby. But when I say I've been at this for 40 years, I'm not speaking to only D&D. Somewhere in the 80s, I played and ran a great many tabletop role-playing games. Let's back up just a moment. Dungeons & Dragons is one game, the most impactful and well-known game within a genre or hobby known as tabletop role-playing. I understand the world is different at this time, and most D&D is taking place virtually. But the essence of D&D is to sit among friends at a table with books, dice, and all sorts of geekiness strewn about the tabletop. You play the role of monsters and characters and have a load of fun, as one would with a game. Hence, tabletop role-playing game. In pointing you to those other two games, I'm not saying you should be playing them instead of D&D. This is also not a video on what the appropriate version of D&D is. This wonderful hobby is wide open, and it's up to each of you to find the best game and edition for you and your group. I'm pointing you to Unknown Armies and Warhammer Fantasy because they are among the games that have shaped my path as a creator, a dungeon master, and a tabletop role-playing hobbyist. D&D, and specifically 5th edition D&D, is and should be the go-to for your tabletop RPG needs these days. I say this for two reasons. First, the resources are in place, whether from the community or the creators, to make the game accessible. Through the juggernaut of Critical Role, the celebrities that talk highly of it, and the various online formats that speak of it, most venturing into the hobby will only know of D&D. Second, the current edition of D&D, while not without its flaws, is the most concise and polished, in my opinion. With essential kits, starter sets, and a free downloadable rulebook, it's the easiest game to get into and stick with. If you haven't found a group to play with, 5e D&D is still going to be the easiest sell. Most already have a book or two, and if you have D&D Beyond, you can share the content. The same cannot be said for other versions of D&D, and certainly not any tabletop role-playing game that isn't titled Dungeons & Dragons. So why would I mention these two non-D&D games? I'm not saying you need to or should reference Unknown Armies or Warhammer Fantasy to be a better creator, a better dungeon master, or a better player. But as for what I bring to the hobby as a whole, my experiences within these two games as both player and game master are equally as important and as impactful as the adventures I've taken within the D&D space. If you already have a group of friends and you're not seeking new players to play with, you might want to take a look at these two wonderful games. If you aren't new to the hobby and you're not already overwhelmed with the wealth of options out there, you might want to take a look at these two wonderful games. If I'm the first person to introduce you to them, and you sit down with good folk and good food and give these two games a shot, you'll thank me someday. I leave you with one final question. What games outside of D&D, even video or board games, have shaped you as a creator and storyteller? That's all I have for you folks. Thanks everyone for watching, and take care.